The book of Esther begins with an interesting idea. The rabbis elaborate on it. So let's just take a look at the verse and see what the rabbis have to say. Vahi b'mei Achashverosh. And it happened in the days of Achashverosh. Who Achashverosh? He is Achashverosh. Hamolech meHodu v'ad Kush. That ruled from the city of Hodu until the city of Kush. A total of Sheva ve'esrim u'me'ah medina. A total of 127 provinces is what Achashverosh ruled over. So we're speaking about Achashverosh and the kingdom that he was ruling over. They specifically tell us about 127 provinces. Now, just to be clear on some of the facts, it's considered to have been the entire known world. He took over the kingdom of Babel, from which started with Nebuchadnezzar, when he originally destroyed the first temple, the Beit HaMikdash. And so now Achashverosh is considered one of the kings that ruled the entire world. There are a number of kings that rule the entire world. He's one of them. And so the 127 provinces do not mean that he only ruled over those and not more. Those include the entire known world of the time. Okay, very important point to just be aware of. Now, so let's get started. So you have the papers. We're going to look at Midrash Rabba. It's a collection of stories and ideas that the rabbis talk about. Usually the Midrash is similar to the Gemara. The Gemara and the Midrash are usually similar, rabbis speaking. Midrash is usually more ideas. It's talking about Jewish thought, Jewish philosophy, ideas. And Gemara is really looking for halachic clarifications of Jewish practice. So the difference between the Gemara and Midrash is the idea of conceptual ideas versus practical halachic details that we want to glean. And so let's look at a conceptual idea that Rabbi Akiva is the author of. Okay, so looking at your pages, it's by the number 8 in your book. There's the number 8 over here in the sheet you have. Right here, 8. Excellent. Okay, so let's get started. On the phrase that Achashverosh ruled over 127 provinces, so he's going to speak about this. Okay? Rabbi Akiva haya yoshev v'doresh. Rabbi Akiva was sitting and expounding on the book of Esther, Megillat Esther. And there are two different places that this teaching appears. And so we're going to put together the language that we want to use because there are small nuances that differ from one place to the other. So just to be clear, he was sitting and expounding the Megillah to the congregation, to the tzibor, to the people. Yes.
Why can you be as like you know how in Gemara you can be really like exacting and say like, well, why does the Gemara say this exact word and blah blah blah? All right, so can you do that with Midrash?
Yes. The difference would be we're not going to make halachic rulings based on them. We won't take a precise reading and then determine whether something is forbidden or permissible to do, but rather we will glean conceptual ideas from the wording and from the style of language. Extra language will take out more ideas of thought, not of practical details of halacha. Okay, that would be the difference. But yes, in both cases, the structure of learning and the style of learning is similar. There are the 13 principles that the Torah is expounded, and in other places they talk about 32. So that applies in both places. Okay, so again, Rabbi Akiva is teaching the people. Specifically, we want to make sure that it's the people. That's one place in Midrash Rabba Bereshis when this is connected there with Parshas Chaye Sarah. It says over there that he's speaking to the people. Here it says he's speaking to the students. And there's a difference between students and people which we'll have to be aware of. Now, so he was speaking to the people. That's the way we're learning it. And they were dozing off. They were not paying attention. They were falling asleep. Okay, they were mitnamnem. They were sleeping, half sleeping, right? Ba'a le'ar'ara. Rabbi Akiva wanted to wake them up. Yaton. Amar, he said to them, Ma zachta Esther limloch al sheva ve'esrim u'me'ah medina. What did Esther do to merit ruling over 127 provinces, which is again the entire world? What was so special about Esther that she ruled over all of these provinces? How did she rule over these provinces? Because she was the wife of the king of the world, and so she was the queen of the world. And so she had this special merit to be the queen of the entire known world. So what was so special about her? Ella, kach amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem says, Tavo Esther, bat bita shel Sarah, let Esther, the granddaughter of Sarah, Shechaita, Sheva ve'esrim u'me'a medina, that lived 127 years, let her come, v'timloch al Sheva ve'esrim u'me'a medina, and let her rule over 127 provinces, a province per year that her grandmother Esther lived. So she's going to rule over a province for every year. Okay? In the Midrash of the book of Esther, it says not granddaughter, but daughter. Okay? And there's a slight difference between daughter and granddaughter as well. And so let's first of all deal with the nuances. Okay? If he's speaking to his students, the Talmidei Chachamim that he taught to, he had Talmidim who were themselves wise Torah scholars. So then there's a message. He's addressing the Torah scholars. But if he's addressing the tzibor, if he's addressing the people as a whole, then he's speaking to everyone. He's speaking to the men, the women, the learned, the not so learned, and even the children. Because when you go to shul, for example, today, and a rabbi gives a talk to the entire shul, so it means everyone is there. Men and women today, certainly. In the olden days, maybe the women didn't go, but the idea was you're talking to the entire community, the less learned, the more learned, the whole community. And again, these ideas would spread because after you learn in shul from the rabbi, so where do you talk about what you learned? On the Shabbos table, on the holiday table. So there's a message that's for the entire people, and there's a message that's more the Chachamim talking to each other. Okay? So that's important to understand. We're going to go in the direction of a message that's for the entire generation of people, and everyone included, not just the scholars. Okay. Now, when we speak about the idea of talking about daughter or granddaughter, the other difference in the two different texts. So, there's a difference between mentioning daughter or granddaughter. In both ideas, in both options, there seems to be a problem. What's the big problem in referring to Esther as or daughter or granddaughter? What's the obvious problem? She was born many, many generations after Esther. She wasn't even close to granddaughter, for sure not daughter. And so with the many generations between them, she wasn't a child. She was a descendant much, 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 much later. So when taking that into consideration, so the word daughter, if we would learn the text to read daughter, so that we could work out and say, we're all the daughters of Sarah. We're all the sons of Abraham. And so the term daughter isn't a problem. But the girsa that says granddaughter, that's more of a problem. Why? Because if you're going to speak in terms of descendant and the idea of how Sarah is the mother of all of the Jews, so just say mother. But as soon as you say granddaughter, it doesn't flow as much. It doesn't match. Because why say granddaughter? You should have just, granddaughter is already odd. Okay. With this said, so let's get started. Okay. The standard explanation of this idea of Rabbi Akiva is that he saw the students were not paying, the congregation, the people were not paying attention. They were half asleep, sleeping. They weren't there with him. So he wanted to get their attention. So what did he do to get their attention? He presented some type of teaching in riddle form, something that was going to get them curious and to spark them, wake them up. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to wake them up, get them alert, get them attentive. So that's what he wanted to do. Now, this is similar to a teaching that says that there's a suggestion that when a rabbi wants to give a class, he should start off with a joke. Milta bedichuta is a joke. Now, what's a joke in a Torah terminology? A very sharp, a very witty, an unexpected type of thing. We're not talking about stand-up comedy. We're talking about a combination of reverence together with simcha. We don't mean just stand-up comedy. We mean something with some type of purpose and content. And the purpose is to hit the people with something unexpected, because when you hear something unexpected, it affects your mind in a certain way. It, so to speak, opens up your mind. For example, by way of analogy, there's an idea to have something spicy which opens up your taste buds to appreciate different flavors of food that you're going to eat. So this is like sending a wake up to your mind in order to be more attentive and be able to absorb the ideas that Rabbi Akiva wanted to teach to people. But first he uses this idea of a rabbinic joke. We'll call it a rabbinic joke. So what do you think is the catch? I think that there are two options here. I think catch number one is the matching numbers. Like everyone loves gematria, or some people I hear don't like it, but gematria is cool. When you find a match, a number match, it's very, very cool, very interesting to find that match. For example, a very well-known gematria, or a very, very powerful gematria with a very simple message is the word echad, aleph, chet, dalet equals 13, and the word ahava equals 13. Aleph, hey, bet, hey equals 13. What's the correlation between one and love? So in the verse where Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, become married and unified, so that's the idea. They become one flesh, the Torah says. That they became one flesh. So this is the love. It says that Adam loved his wife, and they become one flesh. So love, the type of marriage, type of love, can bring us to the unity and oneness of a couple in marriage. And so that's an example of gematria, how cool and deep and whoa. And it's like, by using the numbers to get to the idea, it adds a level of beauty, a level of depth, a level of preciseness, to see the wonders of Lashon HaKodesh, the Hebrew language, that's divine in conception. And so that's one example of gematrias, and he brings numbers here, not gematria, but numbers to give us that, wow, the numbers match. That might very well be what was meant to get our attention. Yes?
A really cool example of gematria that I just learned, someone just told me that Rabbi Goodwin said, which is, and it's not like conventional, but it's like, so God, the word, the English word, God, if you take the English gematria of G, O, and D, it adds up to 26.
Wow. That would wake me up.
Same as you keep up.
That would very much wake me up. It's interesting to take gematria from English. It's interesting what we could do with other languages. It's very, very nice. Fine. Good. I'm happy you mentioned it. Yasher Koyach.
Yeah, it's crazy though, no? It's like...
Yeah, it's interesting. Definitely interesting. Let me now move on to the next suggestion. According to the Girsa that it says Bat Bita, the granddaughter, so here too we can have potentially what he meant as the idea of the shocking statement that doesn't fit right to get everyone's attention, to wake them up, because clearly Esther was not a granddaughter of Sarah. She was many, many generations later. So that could be the point of the shock and of the attention getter to wake them up. Yes.
Also, I mean, isn't it like, why do we have a Havamina that she didn't deserve it? Wasn't she like a tzaddikas? Is it in question whether or not she was a tzaddikas?
So I'll answer you simply. I'm not meaning to push off your question. Does every tzaddikas get 127 provinces? Okay. She was one of the few Jewish women that ruled the world, the entire world. I mean, the Queen Mashiach. I actually never don't know if we're going to call her Queen Mashiach, because there'll be King Mashiach, and then there'll be Queen Mashiach. What will she rule? I don't know. But she ruled, one of the few Jewish women that ever ruled the entire world. So I think she's unique. What did she do? Why? Why did she? So we're being told over here that because of some way connecting to Esther. That itself could be the shock. Part of the shock treatment was, look, there's a connection between Esther and Sarah, and the numbers match, and the whole thing just takes us in like, whoa, where you got our attention, Rabbi Akiva, let's go. Hit us with some big stuff. He was a big Kabbalist, and I'm sure that there are a lot of Kabbalistic ideas very deep in this idea as well. I'm going to bring up a few questions now, which are, with God's help, we're going to link the questions and the different answers and come out with a thought. Okay? So, I already hinted to some of the questions. Number one, the significance of Rabbi Akiva talking to his generation of people, not necessarily the students. That's one point. Another point is, what does it mean that the congregation, the people, imagine a generation of people are not really with it. They're half asleep. They're dozing off. They're sleeping. What does that mean in a deeper sense? Another question is, of course, the peculiar connection that we are pointing from Esther back to Sarah as a granddaughter. Why that connection? Of course, the matching of the numbers of the 127 provinces to the 127 years. That what's going on there in a deeper sense. And finally, what's the connection that Rabbi Akiva would have to this idea, that he's specifically the author of it, and we're learning this idea from him and not another rabbi? And last but not least, what does all of this have to do with me in my life? And why are we studying this ancient teaching, it has to obviously affect me in some way, do something for me. So let's get started. Rabbi Akiva was a very unique and special rabbi. One of the absolute greatest rabbis ever. He was the rebbe of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was considered one of the greatest rabbis. He's the rebbe of the rebbes, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the great Kabbalist that revealed the Zohar, taught the Zohar that we have today. And so these are among the greatest of rabbis. So clearly Rabbi Akiva represented Jewish leadership par excellence. He was the leader of the Jews. And so he is responsible. Every generation of the Jewish people is like corresponding to a human body, right? Adam is this concept of the totality of the souls of Israel. And just like the idea of the Adam has a head, shoulders, and a body. Now this is physical, but we're talking spiritually. We know that all of the souls of Israel correspond to some part of Adam HaRishon, and this idea of this soul of the Jewish people above, we come from different levels, different parts. There are souls that are on the level of the head, and there are souls that are on different levels. The Jewish leadership, they call them Bnei Aliyah, men of ascent. According to Hasidic doctrine, it's a special soul from the high world of Atzilut. We're talking about a super soul. These are the Jewish leaders, the leaders among the leaders, the unique people of every generation, these unique tzaddikim of the generations, like Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon, Avraham, Moshe, they're all Bnei Aliyah, very high neshamot. And they're the heads of the generations, and they're the heads of the Jewish people. They're the true leadership. They're the eyes of the people. And so Rabbi Akiva definitely is one of these type of leaders. And so he's like the head of the entire people that he's teaching. Now, what happens is that his role is to be their leader. His role is to keep them connected with him. And so when he sees his generation, a generation that was after the destruction of the temple, when he sees a generation dozing off, falling asleep, losing that connection, his job as the head and the leader, the connector, is to wake them up. And that's what's going on over here. He sees the people downtrodden, sleeping. And sleep is a level of death. They're not functioning, they're not alive, they're not connected, they're off course. Sleeping is compared to exile, compared to darkness, compared to dreaming. And it's my job to wake them up spiritually, to not just physically wake them up now because they're sleeping in the middle of my discourse, but that's indicative of the idea of that the whole generation is weakened, sleeping. Like it says in the Megillah story itself, that they were sleeping. The people of the generation of Shushan in the Purim story also were sleeping. It says that the sleep of the king was awakened. How was the sleep of the king awakened? And what does it mean that the king was asleep in the Purim story? Because the above world corresponds to the below world. Sometimes the spiritual realms above react to what we do. Since we were sleeping below, so there was the spiritual sleep above. But when we woke up from below, then it says the king woke up from above. It's connected. And here too, he sees again the problem of Purim, of sleeping. He sees his generation falling asleep, and it's his responsibility to do something about it as the leader of the generation. So that's appreciation of Rabbi Akiva's role, who he was, what he represented, and of course, the idea of why he wants to specifically wake up the people, because he can't leave them in such a state. Yes?
So there's a connection between Moshe Rabbeinu and Rabbi Akiva. Like in the Torah, we see like many times people not listening.
Yes.
Like,
well, what I'm essentially fine.
Whatever,
So I'll make it clear. What I'm essentially saying is that Moshe Rabbeinu was the leader of Jewish people in the time of the desert. Rabbi Akiva was the leader in this particular time, and their roles are connected. Yes, he was the level of Moshe. He was the level of Moshe. He was like in every generation, there's like the Moshe of the generation, and Rabbi Akiva was that type of leader in his time. Okay, so that's part one of this, of where we're going so far. So now let's appreciate and understand right now what's the uniqueness of Rabbi Akiva, and why is he the one that's pointing out to us right now this connection between Esther and Sarah. We want to appreciate that connection now, and Rabbi Akiva's role in bringing this out is this. Rabbi Akiva lived in an interesting time in history. He lived in a time of galut, of exile, of a lot of persecution and a lot of suffering. In many ways, Rabbi Akiva's story is similar to the story of Esther in Shushan and the Jews of that period of time. Now, what's the importance of understanding this story is that when we're in Galut, the same way that Esther was in Galut, so there's a connection between Rabbi Akiva and his teachings and the story of Esther and their Galut. Now, let's try to put ourselves in Esther's position, Esther's shoes, and really that entire generation, because Esther really is a story of the Jewish people, not only then, even now. And so imagine she's an orphaned girl, in a time where it seemed that God abandoned the Jewish people. The Persians certainly felt that God threw the Jews away, and he doesn't want them back, and because he didn't save them. They were supposed to be saved already years ago, and the prophecy didn't come true. And so there's this feeling and energy of despair. We've been rejected. Look where Hashem left us. We're at the lowest point in the history of the Jewish people. They were at the lowest point. Rabbi Akiva wants to tell his generation, let's wake up. Let's wake up. We're in a tough situation now. We're in Galut. We're being massacred. Hashem has thrown us out of our land, Israel with the Mikdash. We're in a similar position as Esther was, and her people were in their times, with the harsh decrees against them. They thought that Hashem had abandoned them and that they didn't deserve any more divine protection. They thought that they were going to be destroyed. And we, in our time right now, can feel the same way. How many of us are struggling? How many of us are suffering from loss of loved ones? In Rabbi Akiva's time, the hard times. You weren't allowed to learn Torah. They killed the 10 martyrdoms. He was himself eventually taken and murdered for teaching Torah. Terrible, terrible times. Where's Hashem? How could he leave us in such a situation? There's even support. The history of the Jewish people, it says that when Hashem put his people in Galut, so the question comes up, where's God's greatness now? If God's people are being stepped on and treated like this, where's God's greatness? And it's the men of the Great Assembly that come many, many years after the Jewish people were in Galut and said, you know what? We have a chidush. The fact that we're still here is a testimony to Hashem's greatness. Just because we're being trampled on and abused and hurt and we're suffering and we don't see Hashem with us doesn't mean Hashem's not great, because we should be gone by now. With all of the Jew haters in their times, there should have been no more Jews. The fact that we're alive, no matter what our standing is, no matter what our situation is a testimony to the greatness of Hashem. And they restored the praises of Hashem, Hakel, Hagadol, Gibor, V'Hanora. It seemed like, how can we say that God is the Gibor and the Gadol and the Nora when his people are on the bottom? The answer is, the fact that we are here is a testimony to Hashem's unbelievable greatness, because we are an undying people. We are the people that can never be killed ultimately. And that's an unbelievable power of Hashem. So this is just to appreciate the connection between Rabbi Akiva and his generation, and he wants to bring them back to a time of Esther and Mordechai and their generation and their darkness and their struggle that ended with a tremendous salvation. And so he's trying to give chizuk, he's trying to wake up and give the strength and feed the emunah to his generation. You think we're disconnected? You think we were lost? You think it's all over for us? You think we're going to die out? Well, that's exactly what the Jews at the time of the Purim story thought. And an orphan girl that was taken by the king, we thought that she would die out too also. And there would be no more Jews and no more tzaddikim. And that was the end. It looked like the end for them as well. But you know what? It wasn't the end for them. And that's why we have to take strength and realize it's not the end for us. It's tough. Hashem is hiding. It's darkness. But it's not the end. It's not the end. And he goes one step further. And this is, I think, the heart of the lesson. He says, you know what? I'm going to go back. We're going to go back to the beginning. Sarah Imenu. Our mother Sarah. Sarah's tent. Sarah's tent was an unbelievable thing. You know what Sarah's tent represents? She had 3 miracles in her tent. There was special chalot that lasted from week to week. There was her candles, her Shabbat candles were lit from week to week. And there was a cloud above her tent, which represented the divine presence, the Shekhinah. The divine presence in this world was with Sarah in her tent. Sarah's tent is really the true and first model for what eventually became the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the Bet HaMikdash later. Sarah's home was a Bet HaMikdash, because the Bet HaMikdash has the same 3 miracles. The bread lasts from week to week. The menorah is lit in the in the Kodesh from week to week, and the divine presence, the cloud of glory that was above the tabernacle, and the divine presence that was in the Beit HaMikdash. And so Sarah's tent is the idea of this Beit HaMikdash, the idea of the presence of Hashem. Her life was a holy, holy life. 127 years that Sarah lived, it says that they were all good. Kulam shavin letova, they were all equal for good, Sarah's life. Sarah's life, although she had her own hardships, represents a life where we see that God is with her. It's written in the Bible. Her entire story is written in the Bible, and we see the attention that she's getting and Abraham is getting. Every word, every part of their lives is part of the Bible. And that's the idea of a revealed good that Hashem gave them, that Sarah was connected to Hashem throughout, from week to week, from day to day, from year to year. Her entire life was a life connected to Hashem in a revealed way. And there were difficulties. She didn't have a child for a long time, but still the overall energy and connection was with Hashem. She had her own Beit HaMikdash, and she is really the prototype for the Beit HaMikdash, which is what we are mourning today, and which is the generation of Esther was mourning, and also Rabbi Akiva's generation was mourning. And Rabbi Akiva wants to teach them an unbelievable lesson. You should know there is really no difference between Esther and her time. There's no difference between us and our time, and Sarah in her time. No difference. And what essentially that means, and there is really no difference between when we had the Beit HaMikdash moments ago and now that we don't. There is really no difference. There is one big difference, but not really a difference. You know what the difference is? In the generation of the Beit HaMikdash, when we were in Israel, we saw that Hashem was with us. But now, with the Chorban HaBayit, like Esther and us, we have to believe that Hashem is with us. Hashem is still with us. Because you think he left us, so did Esther and their generation think maybe that he left them, and they didn't. I'm telling you that the generation of Esther and Purim were connected to Hashem just like Sarah. And to prove my point, I'm going to show you. Sarah lived 127 years, a seemingly insignificant detail in the story. Who cares if it was 127, 128, 126, 125? That's just a number prat in the years she lived. But we're telling you that because she lived 127 years, Esther ruled over 127 provinces. Why do we call her a granddaughter? Because just like a granddaughter is so close to the grandmother, there's a deep connection there. They're not disconnected. She's connected to her grandmother. Connected. And if you would say mother, also connected. We're connected. She was connected, and we're connected back all the way to Sarah with the Shekhinah and with the miracles and with the Beit HaMikdash that we have. We don't have it physically, but we're connected. There's no disconnect. And we have to wake up to that reality. In fact, we can argue what he's essentially telling her over here is like this. So right now we understand Esther and Sarah are so connected. They're like it's like her granddaughter, her child. They're connected. Sarah's life was a life where Hashem watched every step of it. He took interest in everything that Sarah and Avram were doing. And that's the reality right now. Hashem is taking an interest in everything we're going through. The suffering is also from Hashem. He's watching us, and he's taking care of us in a way that only he knows how to, because there's things that are beyond our understanding that have to happen. But it doesn't mean that Hashem has left us. It doesn't mean that Hashem has abandoned us. Just like in this Purim story, Hashem did not abandon Esther, Mordechai, not one Jew. And it was an amazing miracle. In the miracle of Purim, during the military battle against all the Jew haters in the world, not one Jew was hurt. Not one Jew died. Hashem gave them 100% protection. Haman said, I want everyone dead. Hashem said, I'm not even going to let you have one. You're not even going to touch one of them. And that's the real Hashem that we have right now with us. Ha'el, Ha'gadol, Ha'gibor, Va'anora. He's here right now. We just don't see it. But through Emunah, we can have it just like they have it in the times of the Beit HaMikdash and in earlier times. That's what I think Hashem's help is the lesson here. Rabbi Akiva is saying we are on this relay race, right? We are on this relay race. If we're disconnected now, then the life of Esther is over. Then the life of Sarah is over. Sarah's alive because Esther was alive. And Esther's alive if we're alive. But if we're dead, everyone dies with us. We carry the life and the continuation of the Jewish people. Like a relay race. That first runner that runs a lap, so he's sitting down. He's watching now like everybody else. But you know what? He's not like everyone else. Because he's part of the race. what makes him part of the race? His teammate is still running. If the last runner in the relay race will trip and fall and not get up, at that moment, all of the previous racers are also out of the race. But as long as there's someone still racing, running in the race, even though they're all sitting, through that person, they're in the race. And that's the idea right now. When we stand up, wake up, and realize our divine mission, our connection, our responsibility, so we keep everyone that came before us alive. We're connected like one body. All of the generations are ultimately also like one body. Just like Rabbi Akiva was the head of his generation, and he had the responsibility to be connected to the people and keep them alive like one body, so too all of the generations put together are like one body, and we have to be connected and alive. And we are the feet, and the feet keep moving. If we stop moving, then they stop moving.